Thank you very much, and it's lovely being here with you. Thank you for that introduction. It reminds me of I was at a conference once and the speaker was introduced and she got up and she says, after that introduction, I can't wait to hear what I'm going to say. So anyway, it's lovely to see so many people gathered here and interested, because as we know, we're at a very critical time. There's no doubt about that. We're at a very critical time in our history, and we really have to do something. So the title for this evening is Climate Change and Biodiversity Crisis, the two crises really. Impossible challenge for the modern world, that's a question. And I would just be interested, before I begin, just spontaneously, who thinks it's an impossible task for the modern world? Just raise your hand if you think it's an impossible task. Okay. Okay. Who thinks not? Fine. We'll try that again at the end. All right. So, yeah, this is, as I say, we're in a time of major crisis. And it's not new to be in a time of crisis, obviously. And crisis can be a moment of breakdown or breakthrough. You know, so hopefully when we explore this, we'll see that there are possibilities. And with the time that we have tonight, I'll probably only, develop about 3 possibilities around this, and then we'll see where we are. There's little doubt, and this is stating the obvious of, look at our reality, that we've lost our way because of the old worldview that we continue to live out of, and the signs are all around us. We're very aware in the last 10 years in particular of all the major institutions that supported us and that we lived through, most of us anyway. Most of them are now collapsing, whether we're talking about finance or politics or the social structure, religion, all the different institutions are somehow under threat or collapsing. And you can say, oh, that's terrible. Or you can say, thank God, there's a breakthrough. So we'll see how we get on. So anyway, these signs are all around us, and it's not different. It's not really. We're stating the obvious here. We're in big trouble. We know about global warming. Colin was talking there about the Amazon, and the lovely prayer John was about the Amazon. And just on a note of hope, I just heard before I came in here that 5 other countries have now signed up to protect the Amazon, which is lovely, and hopefully that will increase as well. And also today was a major breakthrough. We have now reached $11 trillion has been moved from fossil fuels. So that's a huge step in a few years. That's according to 350.org. So there are signs of hope. We are coming to the end of an oil-based economy. It'll take time, but we're coming to that. And there's a huge, massive loss of biodiversity, and this is very worrying because we all depend for our life and our sustenance, our food and everything on biodiversity. The global economic system, that market economy, has failed us as well. And we have crises of arms and militarism, we have crises of drugs, violence of so many different kinds. We have the refugee crisis, the homeless crisis, not to mention Brexit, of course. So there's so many crises around us. And it could be disheartening, but it's good to name them as well and to acknowledge that. Jesus always challenged us to read the signs of the times. And those of us who are old enough remember Vatican II as well back in the 60s. The underlying message was, read the signs of the times and see what you can make of it. Jesus was always urging people to expand their way of thinking, to expand the consciousness. That's what the parables are telling us. And just before, at the Last Supper, before his death, he said, I have many more things to tell you, but you couldn't bear them now. You're not ready to hear them now. But the Spirit of truth will come and will guide you into all truth. And that's the world we're living in at the moment. Look into the Spirit for guidance and to each other through the Spirit. And then Jesus calls us to the more when he says, I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. And that's a powerful message. Life and abundance is what we've been offered here. And let's go for that. This is Socrates, going back a long time. He says the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not into fighting the old, but on building the new. Allow the new to emerge. What's emerging? Allow it to emerge and support that. And then one of the great thinkers of our day, Charles Eisenstein, I'm sure you've heard, he wrote a book that I think everybody should read. It's called The Ascent of Humanity. And he asked this question, he says, is it too much to ask to live in a world where our human gifts go towards the benefit of all, where our daily activities contribute to the healing of the biosphere and the well-being of other people? It sounds a very simple question, and it's a good question to keep with us. Are we prepared to put our energies and our gifts, and we are all very gifted in different ways, towards the benefit of all? And that's all in terms of the whole community of life. Okay. Climate change. We know this is the big difficulty at the moment. It's the major environmental and humanitarian crisis of our time. And Pope Francis has alluded to this in Laudato Si as well. And how do we know that we have climate change? The signs are all around us. The global temperature rise, we can see this everywhere. Warming oceans, the shrinking ice sheets, the glacial retreat. It's very interesting. I just mentioned that I worked in Iceland for 6 years, which was a fantastic experience. There, the people, the landscape is so different from here. Glaciers were part of the sacred landscape. And just there during the summer, the Icelandic people came together and had the first funeral for a glacier that disintegrated. And symbolically, I think that's very powerful. Symbolically, it's very powerful. They're the first wake and funeral for a glacier that had died. And that's very serious for the people there and for all of us, you know. And it really underlines what is happening in terms of the temperature rise and all of that, and the ice melt. Decreased snow, of course. The Arctic ice is actually burning, which is, you know, a very worrying thing as well. Sea level rise. And this is something that we need to sort of face head on, I think, because so many of our major cities are built on the coastline, and they're very vulnerable, very vulnerable. As you know, some islands are already being submerged, you know, just in the last few years. So like many of our cities built, you know, on the coast are very vulnerable, and this is coming to a crisis now for us because the sea level is rising with the ice melt. And the extreme events, we know about the tornadoes and all the different awful happenings that are going on. Even in Ireland, we've had major disruption climate-wise as well. And then the ocean acidification. And planet Earth, which is in existence for almost 5 billion years, has been able to maintain the acidity of the oceans until now. But there are huge challenges, as you can imagine, one of them being plastic. You know, we know about that. So these are all signs that climate change is real, it's increasing, and it's a big problem. Okay? Then the other is the biological diversity, or biodiversity as we call it. That's the variety of life on Earth, the life in all its forms, relationships and interactions, species and ecosystems. There's life in the oceans. Life came out of the oceans in the beginning, onto land, in the skies, and then we have the subsurface bacteria. So that's the whole of life in terms of the variety of life on Earth. And as I say, many of our professors and scientists are telling us, without biodiversity, there's no future. And Albert Einstein, the great scientist, he told us that if the bees were to go, probably we would survive about 4 years. So that's really stark. And that's scientifically proven, obviously. And then the great scientist, Professor Lee Wilson, way back in 1985, he said, "This being the only living world we were ever likely to know, let us join and make the most of it." And he knew what was coming. He had some sense of what we were doing to the biology of the planet. So the variety of life, and this we call the creative energy of God alive in our universe, constantly creating all the different varieties of life. And this is what we call the community of life. And it's what Pope Francis refers to as the life in our common home. Planet Earth is the common home, and we all share planet Earth. and therefore it behoves each of us to look out for every other being. And one of the worrying things that has been happening in recent years is that we're now, in terms of the biodiversity, we're really destroying that, but we're even more seriously destroying the inner structure of the planet. And this is really serious. Through the drilling and all the rest that's going on, you know, for oil and coal and then the fracking, it's all gone into changing the biological structure of the earth. And that could have very serious repercussions in the future. Okay? And then just to put it in context, Earth Overshoot Day is something that started in the 1970s. And that's the time, you know, it shows us every year. In 2018, last year, Earth Overshoot Day was the 1st of August. When this survey was done first way back in the 1970s, Earth Overshoot Day was the 27th of December. So we're coming gradually back. And this year, it's the 29th of July. And that means this is the time of the year that we have used more of what nature gives us than the planet can renew. And therefore we're going into the reserves, if you know what I mean. It's that kind of idea. So, last year it was the 1st of August. It's back 2 years now this time. We are currently using the equivalent of 1.7 Earths through. These are some of the ways we're doing it. Overfishing, over-harvesting forests, we know that. Emitting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than ecosystems can absorb. So we're always asking, what is our ecological footprint? And how do we intend to reduce it? And this is the big question. If we can reduce our footprint, we'll be able to turn around what's been destroyed at the moment. And I find this here very interesting and very stark. I don't know if you knew, but I certainly didn't, and I got a shock when I realised that life on Earth, humans make up 0.01% of life on Earth. Think of that. And we think that we're in charge of it all and that everything's there to serve us. 86% is on land, 1% in the oceans, and then 13% deep surface bacteria. Humans, 0.01%. Plants, 82%, bacteria, 13%, and everything else is 5%. And then since the rise of human civilization, I don't know if you could call it civilization, but anyway, 83% of wild mammals have been destroyed through human interference mainly. 80% of marine mammals, 50% plants, 15% of fish have been lost. This was in the Irish Times in 2018. Okay, looking at that then, you could become very downhearted and say, what can we do? What can we do? I just put on this quotation by Greta Crosby where she says, loss makes artists of us all as we weave new patterns in the fabric of our lives. And that's exactly what we're being called to at the moment. With all the destruction around us, how can we find the threads of hope and weave those into a way of life that's flourishing, that's life-giving for all beings on the planet, including ourselves? So, some of you are familiar with this here, but I think it really captures what we're trying to talk about here tonight and what we're trying to struggle with. It's a poem by the American Druid Dillinger, and what he says really, he says, you know, he talks about it's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren asked me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unravelling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing as the mammals, reptiles and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? And just to keep that haunting question to the fore now, what did you do once you knew? And every time I look at this now, I keep thinking of Greta Thunberg and the young people who are keeping saying to us, the older generations, you know, what are you doing? Why are you not out there acting? Why are you not, you know, really filling the streets? Why are you, you know, why are you letting this happen? Why are you passing it on to another generation or something? So it's really, really important. So keep that question, what did you do once you knew? And to keep that before us all the time. And that'll help us to turn around from the impossible to the possible. We know about the migrants and the loss of life, we know about the plastics and all of that, and the ice melt, and we know about the forest fires. And then I just put on this quotation here. I think it's kind of important what we're doing at the moment. It just says, looking at all these tragedies and crises, nothing ever goes away until it has taught us taught us what we need to know. So these raging storms, ice melt, fires, are all going to keep coming up every so often until we learn that the earth is saying enough. And once the tragedy is over, we get up and go on again as if it didn't happen sometimes. So it said, nothing ever goes away until it has taught us what we need to know. And then, what did you do once you knew? This is the big question for us all. And to keep that to the fore all the time. And we live, particularly in the Western world, in this market economy, multinationals and all the rest of it. And there's nothing wrong with those in essence, but it's the way that they're operating. And I just put this in here because I think it really makes light of something, but it's a real message. If you really think the environment is less important than the economy, try holding your breath when you count your money. And that puts it in perspective, because really another way of putting that I always try to put out there, because it's so telling as well. When we had the financial crisis in 2007, 2008, which we're thankfully recovering from mostly now, at that time there was a financial collapse right around the world. And do you remember the response?
Save the banks.
What? Anybody, do you remember what happened?
Save the banks.
Save the banks, exactly. So these, not only millions or billions, but trillions of dollars, sterling and euros and yen came to the fore to bolster up the banks, at that time. Now, just hold that for a moment. I'm not saying that's wrong or anything, just saying that's what happened. Supposing one of the living systems of the planet, say the fresh air, the clean water, the sun, the soil, if one or other of those systems was to collapse, who or what could come to the rescue? All the billions and the trillions of dollars or euros or sterling or yen would be useless. So that's the critical part of it. We're able to bolster up, the market economy, but supposing any of the living systems that we depend on, that all life depends on, the whole community of life depends on, and some of those are at a critical point. We know that in terms of some countries don't have fresh air. And there's about 2 billion at the moment, or in excess of 2 billion people don't have access to clean water. And there are many parts of the world that don't have healthy, fertile soil for their food supply. And there are many people going around wearing masks as they walk about because the air is so toxic. So this is actually happening. And our challenge is, can we sort of go in there and stop that and keep those living systems alive before it's too late? That's the big question. And that's whether the task is possible or impossible. Okay. Now I'm going to point to 3 ways forward that might help us to turn this all around. And one of the ways is, it's the story we're living out of. And the story basically we're living out of is the story that we as humans are separate from everything else. Not only that, we're above everything else. Everything's there for our use or our abuse. So we need to change the story. The old account of us being separate or different or above is no longer true or useful. We need to get into the new story of the universe as it is evolving and coming to us. That we all evolved over millennia, over billions of years really. So this new story, and the essence of the new story is that we live in an evolving and expanding universe. It's not static, it's not fixed, it's not designed totally. We live in an evolving and expanding universe where everything is forever in the process of becoming. Nothing is entirely fixed, unchanging, or predictable. It's constantly evolving. And just think of how things have changed in the last 5 years, 10 years, you know, as knowledge has, you know, broadened, widened, and people are beginning to engage that. And Teresa of Avila, this has gone back now a long time, one of the great doctors of the church, she says, I have a sense that God is on a journey too. And if we believe that God created everything, and the energy in the universe is that energy, the creative energy of God, then everything is in the process of becoming. And this is key as we look to the future. And I think this is a major factor in turning that impossible task around to make things possible. The story that we live out of. The story of oneness, of togetherness, of unity, rather than a story of divisiveness or superiority or whatever. And I'm only just going to give a couple of slides to show you what that story was like. It started about 14 billion years ago, that original flaring forth, almost 14 billion years ago. And then it came to this here. Here we have planet Earth. Let's see if we can get this right for you. Let's see if this is not okay. Top right hand corner from you where you're looking is the sun. And planet Earth is down here, the blue one. And if planet Earth was a fraction, a tiny, tiny millimetre closer to the sun or further away from the sun, we wouldn't be here. This is the miracle of life, the miracle of God's creative energy. Just the poise of that, the elegance of that. Planet Earth is the only planet that we know of today, so far, and I say so far, that has the right conditions for life as we know it. You know, there may be life elements on other planets, and that's been explored. But planet Earth so far is the only planet that we know of that has this. And it's a complex planet, obviously. It's just poised nicely there at the right distance from the sun to sustain life. So we, ourselves humans, all beings share the same atoms, minerals and chemicals as the stars. We are literally stardust. We're all stars. So we can turn this around, really take that on board. We evolved in deep time about 14 billion years ago, and we carry the wisdom, that creative energy of God, that passion for life and for newness and for energy that is through the universe. We carry that in our bloodstream and every fibre of our being. We're totally, you know, empowered by that energy and power of God. So let's use that. We share an awful lot with all other beings. We share about 30% DNA with plants and 60% with insects, and a whopping 98.4% with chimpanzees, our closest relative. Even the salt in our blood and tears is the salt of the ancient seas. Every being is unique, different, but not separate in the web of life. And this is the community of life. We all share these elements. We're very closely connected. And that's the essence of our common home. We share this, we share it. It's like we are, we're so interconnected and interdependent. We're literally woven into the dynamics of the universe. Same atoms, chemicals, minerals, the salt, you know, everything. We're so connected. We're so connected. Pope Francis puts it this way: nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or a mere setting in which we live. For so long, we've seen it as something out there, to be admired, to be used, or to be abused. We are part of nature, included in it, and thus in constant interaction with it. And this is so important in terms of how we approach the future, in terms of ecological consciousness. And also, it's important also to know that the earth is just not some material aspect of creation, like a passing through place that we come to and go somewhere else. Within the universe, the planet Earth, with all its wonder, is the place for the meeting of the divine and the human. This is core to our spirituality. Planet Earth is the place of wonder, where meeting of the divine and the human. And this has implications for our spirituality, really. you know, it's interesting. Let's see, sorry. I'm not sure what's happening here, but anyway, sorry about that. Nature as a whole not only manifests God, this is how Pope Francis put it, but it's also the place or the locus of God's presence. That's what nature is, that's what the earth is. And then he talks about the mountains and the seas and people. Just everything is, as it were, a caress of God. Everything is created by God, sustained by God, nurtured by God. We're all a caress of God. So it's like, sorry, let's know what's happening here. It seems to be jumping on me. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. We'll go to the next piece. Now the question is, knowing that we are all part of this great community of life, and that we're all part of the creative energy of God, how then might we live in life-giving relationships with the whole of creation? That's the story piece. Remember I said change the story. That's that piece. Now we're going to look at how might we live in life-giving relationships. First of all, we have to believe. Looking at that sign, what do you see? What do you see written up there? Can everybody read it for me? Here.
Now here, yes.
Opportunity, you can read this: opportunity is nowhere, or opportunity is now here, right? And there's a difference of day and night in that. So part of the whole challenge in terms of the crisis that we're in, and in terms of how to create, you know, a flourishing life in our world today and to find the hope, we need to believe that the opportunity is now here. Rather than, oh sure, it's all hopeless. You know, I can't do anything about it, or my little piece won't make any difference, or whatever. So this is very important. The opportunity is now here. Knowing that the great story tells us that we're all part of that essence of God, that creative energy of God. We're all in it together. So the opportunity is now here to look after our common home, so that biodiversity will be preserved, that there will be food and there will be water and clear air and all the rest of it for all beings, and the habitat for all beings. And this is so important. And going back a bit, it's interesting to see, again, we come to the signs of the times. Do you remember I said that this was said way back in Vatican II, the signs of the times was a big thing, or to read the signs? And this is so important, to read the signs today. Whatever our project, or wherever we focus our energy, unless we are situating that within the context of the total community of life, not just humans and others then, but the total community of life, we are failing to be faithful interpreters of the signs of the times. Thomas Berry wrote that in the 1980s. And then a great economist, Paul Hawken, around the same time said, businesses will not be able to fulfill their social contract with the environment or society until the system in which they operate undergoes a fundamental change that brings commerce and government into alignment with the natural world from which we receive our life. And what he's saying there in a nutshell is that when we talk about the market economy, we really need to talk about the earth economy. And if the market economy isn't in alignment with the earth economy, then there's something wrong. And Indigenous peoples and ourselves, the old Irish and different countries, different cultures people come from, our older generation had this sense that we are so connected, we are so dependent on the earth for life. So businesses have to realise that today, and that's going to be a total change to come to that. The earth economy is the main one, then the market economy has to fit in with the earth economy. And that's the big challenge now, as we know, because governments are trying to come up with policies and frameworks to try and do something to mitigate climate change. And the danger is that it'll be tinkering at the edges rather than actually going systemically. And just to give an example of that we're all familiar with at this stage, we hear an awful lot, say for example, about, oh, we're going to go for electric cars, because that'll reduce, you know, the fossil fuels, and that'll also reduce the carbon dioxide into the air. Now that in itself is a lofty ambition, but you have to look at the small print, and that is, we can have thousands of electric cars But if those cars are still fueled by fossil fuels, that's not a solution. So what we have to do is we look systemically at it. It's great to have electric cars, but we must also have alternative energy to fuel those cars. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's important that we have that, because otherwise you're only multiplying and using more and more fossil fuels by having all these electric cars that have to be powered by fossil fuels. So just all the time, keep looking systemically, and that will help us as we move to the future. Now, just on the third aspect tonight, how are we doing time-wise? We're all right so far? The third aspect I want to just allude a little bit, because this is very helpful in terms of today's word. Pope Francis and Laudato Si, and that response I did to that little book was a response to it. Laudato Si was the first encyclical ever by a pope written to every single human being on the planet. Before that, popes wrote encyclicals to the Catholic population, which is very sizable, but this was the first one to every single being, every person, because it was our common home. And everybody is addressed, and everybody is invited to be part of the conversation, to be part of trying to find a solution to what's happening, so that everybody is engaged. And I just want to point out something, and this is for us now today as we look at the impossible or the possible, okay? What Pope Francis does, he does something wonderful in this encyclical. I'm just going to point it out now, and it can be a way forward for us to move from that impossible to what's possible. What he does, first, he names the reality. What is happening in our common home? Pollution and waste, climate change, loss of biodiversity, and that's the living systems obviously, lack of access to drinking water, decline in human life, breakdown of society, and global inequality. He just names it as it is, both environmentally and in terms of the social. He just puts it out there. And then he goes on to say, this sister, Mother Earth, cries out because we are afflicting her. We've forgotten who we are, that we're made up of the elements of the earth. Remember I said in the story, the air we breathe, the water that we drink, everything is from the earth. And yet, we're moving away from that, and we're just destroying what is life-giving for us. And then he goes on to say, the violence present in our hearts is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, the water, the air, and all forms of life. That's very stark. He puts it out there, just as it is. But this is very helpful to us too. And then crucially, what he says, and I think this is the turning point, at least I feel this is really, really good, and it's something that we have to take on board. He says, I will attempt to get to the roots of the present situation so as to consider not only its symptoms, but also its causes. This is absolutely critical. We look at our reality today. Remember we talked about all the crises that we're familiar with? Now we have to, how do we get to the root cause of why these are happening, right? And he gives us an example. What he goes on to say, we'll just see this, he talks about we've disconnected from the nurturing systems of the earth. And this disconnection is having very serious consequences for all on the planet, especially people in developing countries. So he's beginning to identify, and then he goes on to talk about the fossil fuels. And we have to really get off these fossil fuels, particularly coal, oil and gas. We need to do this without delay. And I was saying today is a very important day. $11 trillion of money have been transferred from fossil fuels and to other alternative energies, whatever. And he equates the whole environmental degradation with world hunger and poverty and oppression. We cannot fail to consider the effects on people's lives of environmental deterioration. Current models of development and the throwaway culture are responsible for this. And he really talks all the time that part of the problem, big part of the problem is we have separated ourselves, and we have acted or lived as if we are separate from every other being. We're above everything else. Everything else is there just for our use or exploitation. And he calls us to task over that. And then he puts it this way: what kind of world do we want to leave to those who will come after us, the children who are now growing up? And think of Greta Thunberg and these young people who will be meeting now on strike on the 20th of September. and they're calling all of us to stand with them in solidarity, wherever we are. What kind of world do we want to leave? And then as if to say, look, if you're not listening to me, maybe you'll listen to this piece. The earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. That's Pope Francis. Can it be any more stark in terms of the reality? Okay, just hold that, and hold that, because this is what we're looking at too when we talked about the crisis at the beginning. One after the other, one was just worse than the other. But the interesting thing is, he says, but the universe as a whole, in all its manifold relationships, shows forth the inexhaustible richness of God. It's not all doom and gloom. Within that, look deeply, look more deeply, and you'll find the universe as a whole, in all its manifold relationships, shows forth the inexhaustible richness of God. And then he goes on to say, rather than a problem to be solved, the world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise. Do you see what he's doing here? Talking about the reality in all its awfulness and starkness, and then looking at that reality a little bit deeper. And that's what we have to do now, as we think of all that's happening around us, whether it's the forest fires or the ice melt or whatever it is. We look at that, and then we're invited to look at it more deeply. Because in that, in the depth of that, there are the signs of hope, the threads of flourishing life. And it's up to us, both singly and together, to bring those to the fore. Okay? And then he says, and this is key for us, all it takes is one good person to restore hope. Look at this room. Think of the ripple effect. All it takes is one good person to restore hope. And here we are, really committed to try and move that from the impossible to the possible. And then he reminds us too, as I said at the beginning, the Spirit is at work all the time, trying to help us to see that. And something new can always emerge. And, I find it interesting, just off the top of your head again, if I was to ask you, is there anything happening in the world today, either locally where you are or worldwide or whatever, that gives you hope? Can anybody say anything that brings them hope? Just to get a few things.
The young people.
The young people, exactly, yeah, great. Anything else that brings us hope?
Collecting plastic.
Yeah, exactly. That's been tackled, yeah. Anything else?
The way the media has opened up to this topic.
Great, yeah, they're doing something about it, yeah. Anything else?
Children
Communities working together.
Sorry?
Communities working together to clean the environment.
Absolutely, yeah. That sense of working together, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. You were going to say something?
Children playing, and the sound of children.
Yeah, that's the music of that, and that gives very hopeful. Yeah, exactly. And there are, so we could go on forever, but there are fantastic things happening. And one of the, I suppose globally, I know that the forest fires and the Amazon, it's horrendous, and you hold that. And then what I would like to put beside that, as a sign of hope, you probably know about or have heard about the Great Green Wall in Africa.
Yes.
Yeah. It's spanning right across from east to west, and it's an initiative of the African people themselves, and it's been helped by other people. I left some information about it there if you want it afterwards. But the Great Green Wall is a great sign of hope. It's a great sign of hope. And then throughout Ireland, there's so many things happening at the moment that are great signs of hope. One of the things that I am particularly interested in, I've noticed a lot lately, is, this organisation called the Men Sheds? Yeah. And they are really, really working for biodiversity. They're making window boxes, they're making bird, boxes, they're going around hospitals and other centres, and they're really trying to promote biodiversity. And that's just a small initiative, but it's absolutely fantastic. And then in terms of breaking in on the big businesses, I was heartened to hear there recently too, down in Cork, the farmers are not getting a good press at the moment. I always have a great heart for the farmers because I come from a farm. But one of the major dairy farmers down in Cork, in County Cork, he went out one day, he's a huge herd and acres of land. And he talks about, he went out one day and he just looked around and he saw acres and acres and acres of green space. No hedges, no trees, just total flat land. And he said, this is not true to nature. And he had this idea, and he began to share it with others. And eventually then, he set up this project called BRIDE, B-R-I-D, and it means biological regeneration in a dairy environment. He started building hedges and planting trees, and he said within a few years, bird song, flowers, the bees, the insects, everything, were all back. He could still continue his dairy herd, but it was a totally different environment. So we got others interested in it, and there's about 5 of the major dairy farmers now behind him in this project, and it's spreading. And they're getting some financial aid towards it. So these things are all great, and it's good to keep them in mind as we go along with this, you know. So anyway, so what Pope Francis did, and this is what we're asked to do. We look at down at the bottom here, we look at the devastation today and the destruction and the oppression, and we're very aware of that. We're so aware of it, both locally and globally. The inequalities and all the rest. And he turned it around and he appealed to our dignity. He asked us to be converted, to take responsibility, and to never lose hope. So it's just a way of putting it very, very briefly, you know, to sum up the encyclical. It's naming the devastation, the destruction, the oppression, but not letting that take over or crippling us, or, you know, whatever. It says, but the dignity of every person, of every being in creation is so important. He calls us to conversion, to take responsibility before it's too late, and never ever to lose hope. And it's very interesting how he does that. I'm not sure all of this because it takes too long. But what he does, he points out to St. Francis, who always had this thing of linking nature and the human together, and that's going back a long time. And then he says, many things have to change course, but it's we human beings who need to change most of all. We've forgotten who we are, that we mutually belong with others, and that we have a future to be shared with everyone. Just think if we could get that consciousness of the emerging story of the universe, and the energy with that we're all one, we're all together in this, and we all look out for one another, in the whole community of life. And then he says, this is the crucial part of Laudato Si. The conversion we seek entails a loving awareness that we are not disconnected from the rest of creatures, but we're joined in a splendid universal communion. So if we were to see ourselves in terms of biodiversity and climate change and all the other kind, if we were to see ourselves that this is our common home, this is our community, the whole community of life, and each one of us has something to offer. That's when we can change the impossible to the possible. And the power and the energy that we have behind us, it's not just the human power and energy, it's the energy of the whole universe. It's God's creative energy with us. And then lastly, I'm just going to dwell a little bit on another aspect of this that's important. That's identified as the root cause of a lot that's happening, of the destruction in terms of biodiversity and uprooting the biology of the planet and all that sort of stuff. We have seen ourselves as being disconnected. So we have to come back, that we're part of the community of life. And in order to do that, I think that as we move forward, another key element is that this is just not something out there that we try to do. This is an inner journey as well as an outer journey. And we have to get to know ourselves as a being among beings in the community of life, made in God's image. We have to take on that identity, and then that energy moves out there to help all other beings and to restore flourishing life in our planet. So the journey is inward and outward. That's okay, that's protect me again. I'll just move on to this. Just want to share this one thought with you as well, because I think it's important. As we think about ourselves and try to understand life today and what's happening, it's very interesting. Our great universe, and the technology that we have today, and it's absolutely fantastic, and I hope it develops more and more, for the good of all life, current exploration into the mystery of the universe tells us that we can only observe 5% of it. The rest of the universe is totally unknown to us. It's dark energy or dark matter. We think we know a lot. We think we know it all sometimes. But this is really, really very sobering. And not only that, but we ourselves, every being, we're all microcosms of that. We are an inexhaustible mystery with inexhaustible richness within, and we'll never know it totally. So not only do we not know much about the universe, we can only observe a certain amount, we're learning more and more. We also don't know ourselves that deeply either. We're learning more and more. So as we move forward to try to change this impossible to the possible, the journey inner and the outer journey are one and the same journey. We get to know ourselves. So who am I? This is so important. Who am I? And if we had time, that you could ask, how would you respond to that? It'd be very interesting. Who am I? We've grown up with, we are God's work of art. But do we really believe that? And we need to believe it today if we're going to really do something different about what's happened around us, what's happening around us. I have called you by your name, you are mine, because you are precious in my eyes and honoured, and I love you. Think of the energy of that, the strength of that, the reassurance of that, as we try to move today to make our world a better place for all. Medieval mystics, I am the fiery essence of God. Just think of that. If we believed a tiny fraction of that, the energy that would be unleashed. Each one of us, each being in creation, is the fiery essence of God. So we have endless potential to make life flourishing and life-giving for all. So, just going to point out a couple of things in this here. It might be helpful. One of the things that's been a hindrance to us, I think, over the years, and we need now to try and do something about that. We have tended to probably live out of a theology that's heavily redemptive, rather than a theology that's based on creation, that includes redemption, right? And with the emphasis on the redemptive aspect to the exclusion of creation, the whole thing of being a sinner is very much to the fore. And most of us, from we were children, have been brought up with that notion that I am a sinner. I'm always asking, I always have to measure up, and I'll never measure up totally. The way. And that has been something, even psychologically, that hasn't helped us. Now, I want to be clear here, I'm not at all saying that we don't need redemption. Of course we need reconciliation all the time with ourselves, with others, with God and with creation. But our primary identity is that we're created by God, therefore we're holy, we're good, we have endless potential. And I believe strongly that in terms of, as we move forward, in terms of trying to turn this around to make it possible rather than impossible, and what's happening, get this flourishing life to the fore again. If we were to live out of that notion of being good and blessed, we have the potential to fall and all of that and mess things up. But really to try and live out of that creation theology rather than the heavily redemptive theology. We need both, but it's the emphasis I'm talking about here. This would make a huge difference in terms of the energy and the enthusiasm and our attitude to life and to others and all of that. It would make a huge difference. And even to trust our inner wisdom. We're part of the divine energy. God, we're created by God. We say that and we believe that. And also to be very compassionate towards ourselves as well as we are to others, That's important. And knowing that we can make a difference. Everything I do can make a difference. That we're not alone. That Earth has much to teach us. We're in this with the Earth itself. And that oneness and diversity is our strength. We're all different, each unique, but not separate. And think of the energy of that. It's really important. Okay? Another way of putting that, and this here, Marianne Williamson, she said one thing, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. As we look to trying to turn this around today, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented and fabulous? Actually, who am I not to be? You're a child of God, your playing small does not serve the world. And the one thing that we really need today is for more and more people to stop playing small, to really take on who we are, the gifts that we have, and all of that, and to really use them for the good of the whole community of life. And I can't say that strongly enough, because I really feel that that's going to be essential as we move forward. Really essential. And then just finally, keeping what I was saying, like the changing the story, seizing the opportunity now and saying it's here, not here, not this, not here, but it's here. You know, looking at ourselves and the journey out and the journey in, and looking at what Pope Francis gave us on Laudato Si. You look at the reality and its rawness and its devastation. You look deeper and keep looking until you find the threads of hope, the threads of flourishing life, and weave those together. And then try to put all that into our actions, And in terms of actions, we know that one of the things we can do straight away is we can commit to supporting the young people in terms of the climate strike, because this is going to be very powerful across the world. And if governments don't listen to it this time, I think it'll be very, very serious. We know that we can do so much ourselves in terms of, you know, recycling and reusing and cutting down on, light and fuel and all of that. But we also know that we need government policies to make that, happen. So, as I say, the inner journey and the outer journey, the more that we can be sure in ourselves and be clear that we're not alone in this, then we can approach governments and put pressure on them to really look, just as Greta Thunberg said, you're not doing it. You're just not doing it. So let's do it, do it. So the whole thing of action is so important for us. And all the actions that we can, I left this sheet there that if anybody wants it to, there's just some actions on it. There's so many things we can do, but as I say, if we can support the climate strike at the moment, that'd be absolutely fantastic. If we could support things like, the Great Green Wall, or the men's sheds in Ireland, or anything to do with biodiversity, just to create your own, like a window box or some space where you attract the bees and insects and all, to bring back biodiversity. And try to shop local, maybe, rather than the miles and miles that food has to travel. All of those small things, they might seem small, but they're actually very, very powerful, very powerful. And then very often when I'm talking to groups, a lot of people say, I used to be able to go out on the picket line. I used to be able to talk to politicians, but I can't do that anymore. Whatever. And then you see, it's interesting, you're still not off the hook, because all of us, whether we're at home, not able to go out, or in nursing homes, as long as we have our minds and all of that, we can support this very, very clearly. There's a movement worldwide today called subtle activism, and that means that you act from where you are, with the capacity that you have. And that means that because we believe that the universe is evolving and we're all part of it, every thought that we have, if it's a positive one, it will help to bring about flourishing life. And we know people who are out working in government policies, or on the picket line, or maybe over in Africa doing something with the migrants. If we can support them by our prayer, or a blessing, or a thought, that is a fantastic ministry in terms of looking after our common home today. So we can all be involved in all the different levels. Globally, we have the development, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the non-government organisations are looking at those worldwide and trying to do something about our planet and society within those. And then in our own local areas, we can join with others who are maybe composting to help support soil, healthy soil. A good way of moving, or practical way, is if you look at the air, the soil, the water and the sun, and think, from my own home, my own life, what am I doing that's either enhancing those or destroying them? that's a good way to get a practical piece, you know, together. Look at those elements. And we're all, I suppose most people here are aware of maybe the ozone layer way back in the 1970s and 80s. And there was great, concern about the ozone layer at that time, just as there is about climate change today. And at that time, over a few years, the main governments throughout the world were able to come together, and they were able to come up with a decision to work towards saving the ozone layer. So it's known as the Montreal Protocol, 1987. And I think of the Paris Agreement today, you know, it's going to be looked at again. And you would love to think, and let us pray and let us send good energy to all the leaders that they will be able to come up with something very practical and doable with regard to climate change and the biodiversity crisis. Because this is going to be so important, so important. So I'll leave it at that, and I'd like then if anybody wants to ask questions or anything, and as I say, I can leave these slides if it any help to anybody. I'll send them to Colin, and yeah. So is there anything anybody would like to talk about or bring up? Because the wisdom is in the group, and I always like to hear ideas from people and all